Hey guys, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Refresh. And today I want to talk to you about home. Especially for those of you that are a little older, you've probably heard the phrase, or maybe you've even stated this: we're going to make our house a home. And I think what we mean when we say that is that we realize that our houses, the physical structure, is temporary, but that the home is something more permanent. And what we mean by that is that we know that the home is all about relationships. So we strive to make the focus of our home life in investing in relationships, because we know that house something could happen to that house, or we could move from that house. That's been the experience in my own life. Kristen and I and our kids, we've moved from house to house to house for various reasons, but it's always been the relationships that have remained very consistent. So I want to go back to our message on Sunday at Etowah Church. We were looking in the book of Judges, and I've been reminded that there is nothing new under the sun. And in our lives today, we face the same reality of making a house a home, realizing that there are some things in our lives that are temporary, and there are some things in our lives and even into the future that are very permanent, but those things center around relationships. But in the book of Judges, we looked at a couple of things about the nation of Israel, about God's chosen people. And the first thing we talked about was Israel's culture. And in the culture of that day, God's own people, we see that those great Hebrew leaders of the faith, Moses and Joshua, they were long dead once you get to the book of Judges. The people of God, they had no earthly king, no earthly authority, so they were lacking in some guidance and security for their lives. The people were defenseless. They were vulnerable on every side of life. They were overrun by foreign invaders. And ultimately, the people avoided main highways for fear of attack. Now, if we think about that culture then and think about our culture today, we are experiencing a lot of the same things in our lives. So maybe consider that culture for your own life today. We deal with people that we look up to, mentors, people that we know, and people that we love, that those people have died, and it often leaves a void in our lives. Maybe for you today, your experience is that you feel like you're lacking guidance or you're lacking security here in this world. Maybe you feel defenseless and you feel vulnerable to society or to the things that you are going through. Maybe it's that you feel overrun and overwhelmed by people or by circumstances that have been brought into your life, and because of that, maybe you're avoiding actions that you need to take because of fear in your life. See, those experiences then are the same as a lot of the experiences that we face today, but be refreshed to know that those experiences are temporary. And then Sunday we talked about Israel's condition, the condition of the people of God. You know, the children of Israel, we read in Judges that they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And when they did that, God would strengthen enemy kings and enemy leaders so he could work through them to fulfill his purpose in the lives of his own people. And through that, God would test Israel. He would test their faithfulness to him. And as a result, Israel, they failed. They bowed to false gods. But when they bowed to false gods, in God's grace, God raised up a deliverer, and that deliverer was a judge, and then that judge would die, and then the children of Israel would repeat this same cycle and this same process over and over and over again. And once again, that is a lot like our lives today. Just think about for a moment the cycles that you go through in life. And maybe you're looking at life today. You're looking down upon your own life, and you see the cycles that you're going through in life. Well, I want you to be refreshed to know today that those cycles of life are temporary. It's just like a house. It's very temporary. But then we closed our time Sunday talking about the book of the Revelation, chapter 21 and verse 1. And it says, "Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth." So this is now something that is not temporary. This is home for the believer, for the Jesus follower. This is something that is permanent. And I want to tell you today, be assured to know that this world is not our home. So everything that we see and everything that we know right now and everything that we go through here temporarily is nothing compared to home. See, in home, at home, in the future, in eternity, what is ugly now will be made beautiful. And what is beautiful now will be made even more beautiful then. So I want to share with you for just a moment some encouraging words from the book of the Revelation and help us to see that these temporary things, the permanence of what is so beautiful, is a reality. So here we believe in God. But at home, we will be with God. Revelation 21:3, it says, God himself will be with them and be their God. Here, we experience tears and death and pain. But at home, Revelation 21:4 says, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Here we experience loss. It could be physical loss. It could be loss of relationships. But Revelation 21:7, at home, it says, he who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. That is a beautiful reality about home, isn't it? And here, you think about our streets and in our communities and all across the nation. In the streets, we see rioting and we see protesting. But in Revelation 21, in verse 21, it says, the street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass. Here, daily in our lives, we see the beauty of the sun, the brightness of the sun. We see how the moon lights up the night sky. But at home, Revelation 21, verse 23, it says the city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. So there's no need for the sun or the moon at home in heaven for all eternity, because the Lamb, Jesus Christ, the glory and the beauty and the radiance of Jesus lights up everything. He is the light. You know, if you think about here, we lock doors. Most people lock their doors at home for safety. We lock our car doors when we get out of our car to protect the things that are in our vehicle. But at home, Revelation 21, verses 25 through 27, its gates shall not be shut at all by day. There shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. But there shall by no means enter it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie. So at home, in eternity forever, it is total security. There is no need to lock anything because we are in the safety of God. You know, you think about here, waters can be polluted. There's lots of unclean water. But at home, Revelation 22, verse number 1, and he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of the Lamb. You know, here we often have unproductive gardens. Maybe you've planted a garden in the past and you worked that garden but it never produced any fruit. It never produced any vegetables, and you looked at that and you thought, what in the world did I do wrong? But in heaven, there will never be an experience of an unproductive garden. Revelation 22:2, it says, in the middle of its street and on either side of the river was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month. So every month this tree will yield fruit at home. And maybe here it's diseases. We see spiritual disease. We see physical diseases. We see mental diseases. But at home, again, Revelation 22 In verse 2, the last part of that verse, it says, the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations. So there is healing of all diseases at home in heaven. And here, we imagine God. We can only imagine what God will look like, what we will see when we stand before God. But at home, we will see God as He is. Revelation 22, verse 4, it says, they shall see His face. We will gaze upon God. We will behold God at home and be in awe and wonder of His beauty and His majesty. And here, maybe there's an experience of bondage, an experience of slavery. But at home, Revelation 22, verse 5, it says, they, God's servants, God's people, they shall reign forever and ever, to no more be in any bondage to the temporary things of this world. So what do we do with that? Knowing that there's temporary and there's permanence. Knowing that we have houses here that are temporary, but there is a home in heaven that is permanent. What do we do about that right now? Well, Titus chapter 2 lays it out for us how we should live right now in this temporary world. And it says in verse 11, for the grace of God that brings salvation has appeared to all men. The grace of God that brings. See, God gives salvation. We don't go out and work for it or earn it. We don't have to go out and get it. The grace of God, God's goodness, He gives salvation. And Jesus appeared for all men. He says in verse 12, teaching us. In other words, there are things that we still need to learn here. None of us have arrived. None of us understand it all. So he says, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present age. So I want to encourage you today and pray that the Spirit of God will motivate you to live soberly. To live soberly is to live with self-control. The things that you know you should do, do those things. The things that we know we shouldn't do, don't do those things. Live under the self-control that the Spirit of God is working within you. And then live righteously. That means to live righteously toward the people that are around you. How do we do that? Live like Jesus lived. You want to know how to live today? Maybe you could just read through the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. See the way Jesus lived and then imitate the life of Jesus. And then he said to live godly. Well, what does that mean? We need to take God very, very seriously right now because He is the greatest reality in this world. He is the one that does not change. And our greatest thoughts should be fixed on God. Our greatest passions should be for God. And we need to take God very seriously in our lives. He goes on in verse 13, and he says, as you live this way, looking for the blessed hope and the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. So let's not forget that while we live, we should be looking. We should be looking and expecting the return of Jesus Christ to take us home, to be with Him in His presence forever and ever. Expect to go home. Anticipate that there is a day that everything here that is temporary, we will know no more, and we will live in the permanence of God and all of His glory. And then he finishes with this. He says, Jesus Christ, in verse 14, who gave Himself for us. Jesus freely gave Himself for us on the cross so that we could have life. He says that He might redeem us from every lawless deed and purify for Himself His own special people, zealous for good works. So Jesus on the cross, He has redeemed us. We are bought and paid for, and He has set our lives apart as a special people to Himself. We have the name of God upon our lives, and we should be zealous for good works, to do the good works now for God's honor and glory, good works toward others, showing the love of Jesus to them, realizing that we have a brief moment in time to make an impact and to make a difference here in this world, because one day we will be going home. So just know, be encouraged, be refreshed today that we are going home, and we can expect and anticipate that Jesus Christ will fulfill His word in our lives.